I had previously shown how I had bought deeply discounted tulip bulbs in January to grow as cut flowers. Since I had planted them much later than the recommended November date, I was skeptical that they would thrive. They did take a while longer to develop than some of my older bulbs I had planted in the garden, but they had been able to overcome their tardy establishment, pushing out beautiful flowers to be cut. The spot I had planted them in was a more neglected space in my backyard. The conditions were far from perfect for the growth of these bulbs, especially considering the limited light they received because of the trees and houses that shade the area. It also happens to be an area with wetter soil, so growing anything of interest becomes a challenge. I had planted them in the back in subpar conditions instead of in my front yard, which has a great microclimate for tulips, simply because I had no room available there. If you're planning to grow tulips, there are a few considerations to take, especially if you want them to increase in numbers and not just dwindle out year after year. In general, tulips decrease production from year to year for most people, unlike daffodils that generally increase. That is part of the reason why you find daffodils naturalized in a forest setting that used to be a garden. Tulips only grow well where they have enough winter chill. They thrive more in zones 7 and 8, so Maryland, where I live, is a great place to grow them. In warmer climates, you must chill them with a refrigerator for 12 weeks before planting them for them to bloom, or buy pre-chilled bulbs. They need a rich soil that is free draining. The more sun you give them, the better. They cannot stand having wet feet, so drainage and proper sun exposure is essential to have them multiply. Centuries of artificial selection for showier flowers have made the bulbs weaker, so they can be susceptible to diseases, especially fungal ones. The key for success is to grow them in their proper place. Cutting their bloom off or deadheading them is also a great practice because that way they put energy back in the bulb instead of developing seed pods. Bees and other pollinators love them also, as they provide essential nectar source early in spring. But while we can't deny that the big, showy tulip blooms are things of beauty, we have a tendency to overlook more humble blooms in our garden, which are a lifeline to pollinators and are quite beautiful also, despite our derision of them as weeds. They are right below our feet. In fact, they are the carpet of flowers in what I consider a perfect lawn. I think it's time for us to redefine exactly what a perfect lawn is. To me, a perfect lawn is one that's useful, not only to humans, but also to the animals that inhabit our ecosystems. I think that leaving plants that are flowering to mix in with lawn and create a non-uniform lawn is vital to keep the healthy populations of pollinators like bees alive. In a day like today where you have so many dandelions and other plants blooming, pretty soon this is going to be filled with pollinators. Close to the evening hours when it's warmer, they're just going to be flocking over here. And if we're applying toxic chemicals to lawns in order to make them into this perfect ideal of uniformity, there has to be something wrong with that. While we all like and appreciate large, showy bulbs like tulips, these underrated and often maligned flowering weeds are true workhorses in the garden when it comes to keeping the beneficial insect population alive and thriving. They have beautiful blooms in their own right. Maybe all we need to truly appreciate their forms and colors is to get a magnifying glass and observe the beauty we never had to work for. Over on this side, I have grape hyacinths growing on the lawn. They're acclimatized to the lawn, and they're majestic. The thing is, I didn't plant them. They grew by themselves. I don't know if there used to be an old garden here and they're a remnant memory of that garden, or if they came by themselves either through birds dropping in seeds. I don't know. I just know one thing. I started to let them flower and completely wither before I passed the lawnmower over them. And that has just given them more strength, and they've put that strength in their bulbs, and they've been able to come up and grow more and multiply. And I see on the other side there's some new grape hyacinths growing. So sometimes you don't have to do anything. Sometimes you have to not do something for things to grow and to look awesome. While these plants are not native to Maryland, they have naturalized here. I can only imagine how beautiful a lawn full of these would look. But they add whimsy to the early spring garden, and much like other foreign species that have naturalized here, they provide essential food for pollinators in our urbanized landscapes. Coming up in the next block, I will share with you an essential trick you must do with your tulips if you want to have them multiply into more bulbs. If you don't do this, you may never be successful with them. We'll be right back after this commercial. After tulip flowers drop, you should deadhead them and let the leaves naturally dry up without cutting them as summer approaches. If you want to prolong the life of your tulips and actually create new tulips, you need to, besides plant them in the right place with well-draining soil and a sunny place, you need to actually uproot them after they've flowered and once they start to wither away with the summer heat. That way you'll store it and then plant it in the fall, and this prevents the bulbs from actually rotting in the humid summer soil. If you don't allow the leaves to naturally dry up before cutting and uprooting, the bulb will not have enough stored energy to divide and produce new flowers. Tulips go dormant during the summer and need stable, dry conditions. Wet, compact soil will spell doom to tulips. In super well draining silty loam soil in a sunny position, you may get away with it, but everywhere else they will rot. I need the bulbs to dry up, so I'm going to put them in a container separated sort of by color family, and I'm going to dig it up using a blunt tool so that I don't risk actually cutting through the bulb and causing it to rot. And I'll put it in a protected place from rain, and that way they'll be able to naturally dry so I can store them in a cool place that's dry. Usually there will be a larger bulb that may bloom again and smaller ones that will need at least an additional year of growth to get to blooming size. As I said previously, it is best to wait for the leaves to dry naturally before uprooting them, unlike what I was doing here. While several of my tulips were already yellowing, I was also uprooting several which were green. I was doing this for several reasons. First, I was planning to use the space for growing lettuce and needed to start the lettuce as soon as possible in order to get a harvest soon. Therefore, I needed to clear the area. Also, as I stated in the beginning, this backyard space was not the best location to grow tulips anyways. I could see how some of the bulbs were showing signs of rotting or mold. This area is much wetter than my front garden, and while the soil is similar in terms of mineral composition to my front yard, the lack of sun exposure makes it have more moisture sitting around. Also, because I had planted these bulbs later than normal in winter, they were a bit behind schedule to my older ones. I had to uproot them, so I decided to leave the green leaves on them intact, allowing them to dry naturally, hopefully storing the most energy they could in the bulb. Also, you might be wondering why I use these wire cages over my tulips. It just so happens that groundhogs eat tulip plants, so I had to use my usual method of protecting plants I wanted to grow. From my experience, I've gathered that tulips are not really a favorite food for groundhogs. They will munch on them when there is nothing else better to eat. So normally, I'm able to grow them unprotected in the front yard, where they can look much better densely planted amongst other ornamental plants. I put the wire on them back here as an extra precaution. I had these extra cages laying around, and I decided to put them over the tulips since I was growing them as cut flowers and not as a normal ornamental garden bed. I put the trays of tulips to dry in a shaded porch, protected from rain. A couple of weeks later, they were completely dry, ready to be stored for the rest of the summer. In order to store them, I had to clean up the bulb from all the unnecessary dry leaves. The larger bulbs were sure to produce new flowers next year. However, the smaller ones most likely would need a year or two to reach maturity. Because I had planted these bulbs later than what was advised in the winter and uprooted them a bit early so that they would not rot in the wetter backyard soil, They were on average much smaller than the bulbs I usually store. They would need a little bit extra care to fully develop, but they had already multiplied in numbers. So potentially I could end up with more tulips. Once I had them all cleaned, I stored them in a paper bag and put them in a cool, dry place indoors to be planted come fall. And all I could do is hope that next year's display would be even better than this year's.